So, firstly, war is pretty obviously an extension of the political process in the same way a fist fight is an extension of the social process. I mean, you could call it a breakdown of communication, you could call it a failure of communication, but either way, it's sort of where communication frays at the edges and transforms into a different format, you know. It's where dramatic change is perceived to be required and there are no other political solutions. And honestly, people say that they would like to get rid of war, but that's one of those sentences that, um, by all indications, seems to be a failure of understanding what human beings are. Getting rid of war is like saying, let's get rid of fist fighting or anything like that. It's a feature of politics and statecraft, not as somebody who is saying that they support war. Uh, Not at all. Actually, it's simply stating that it's not going anywhere ever. It just isn't. The only way you could conceivably get rid of war is to have one side or one entity so superior that nobody ever fights. And the side that has this superiority never uses it. It's like the only way to stop fighting is to have somebody around who would just defeat everybody, but never does. I know that sounds, we like to have this idea where it's like, well, we can work it out, or we can get communication so excellent, maybe that's the right word, to where we can solve any issue by communicating, which is great. I love that. I do. But that's fantastic for the person saying it right then and there. But you have to remember, um, it's like hunger itself. You don't just eat today and you're good. Like, you have to eat 3 times a day for the rest of your life, and then there are more people after you who continue to eat. So you never really solve hunger in the same way you never really solve war. Like, it's always there, but it's satiated in different ways and prevented in different ways and taken care of in different ways. But it's always there. It's a built-in feature of existing as intelligent entities, because obviously, other creatures are less prone to going to war because they don't have complex political processes to break down and, you know, end up in a situation where they're fighting and an organized war with a strategy and, long campaigns and all that. So it also seems more and more like Nikola Tesla was right when he said eventually wars will be fought by machines over the oceans, and whose ever machines win are the victorious people, because those machines going against humans would be so one-sided that you have to surrender when your machines lose. And he's talking about like artificial intelligence type machines. This isn't like the late 1800s, early 1900s. You could even tell then what was going to happen, and to him it was obvious because he was around at a time when he noticed how quickly things could change, how quickly you could discover something and it could change everything, which is correct. So it's another way of saying the only way we could get rid of war is if we were perfect. If everybody always understood each other, and not only that, they were willing to sacrifice themselves for other people. You know what I mean? You have to imagine that situation where before the modern era, when you would have people or a town or a culture that proliferated in a certain area, but right next door there was another one, and next door to that there was another one. And while the people were similar in a lot of ways, just by the very fact of their non-self-imposed accidental segregation, different chemicals between people formed, different ideas formed, different ways of comprehending the world, the land, everything formed. So that's where it starts. It starts by different comprehensions of what's happening, different comprehensions of reality, different explanations, even religion, God, politics, all of it, different political structures, different economic structures, coming to different conclusions, and then eventually crossing paths, because whether we like to admit it or not, the tendency of a culture is to expand. And it's that way because there's a bit of a gratification in the idea that you got it right. You know, it's an interesting feeling to come up with certain conclusions and then have somebody who did not come up with that same conclusion adopt your ideas and then have it work out for them. You know, it's a good feeling. It's kind of a, hey, we got it right, and I'm glad you found out as well. But people are proud, man. Emotions are extremely, they're knowable, yet extremely unpredictable at the same time. But you don't truly know how somebody's going to respond to a person approaching them with a better way that is genuinely better, you know, like across the board. I mean, a person could turn that down because they don't like the person presenting it. They don't like your attitude. They don't like the way you're looking down on them, you know. It just this. It's near impossible to remove the adversarial element in people, because you could be presented with objective truth and you don't like the person saying it. You know, you don't like the cut of their jib, and you're going to go back to your people and you're going to say, I got a bad feeling about that guy. I don't like what he's up to. I really think it's better if we just keep doing what we're doing, because I don't know who they are. You know, you're going to spin some yarn. And I'm sure there have been actual cases through history where people have met and there was genuine altruism, you know? Oh, who knows what's happened because of misunderstanding. I mean, if you're the leader of your people, you're not just going to suddenly become subordinate to an external force unless you're absolutely forced to. And even then, you're going to need to explain it to your people in a way that kind of makes sense. Like, you're going to need to do some mental gymnastics to even get this thing to work. And even then, it's not going to fit perfectly. Like, it's war is an extension of politics, and some people will go to war even though they know they're going to lose because of, you know, pride, because of this thing that they've built, you know. Like, if you take Iran, for example, and what's going on today and yesterday, I mean, the Iranian leadership has been preparing for decades, and leadership was knocked out in the first wave. They were out, you know, in minutes. And it's just one of those examples of how, especially today, you can create these reality tunnels, and you can build these so-called, like, truth tunnels for people. And when you do that, you have to hope against hope that nothing real actually happens. You know, there's a saying these days, you know, nothing ever happens. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that people build these reality tunnels, and at the same time, do their best to prevent anything from actually happening because it would collapse the tunnel. So it's like, due to the way information can be proliferated so easily now, and you can create vast swaths of truth territory where people can inhabit that zone and communicate as if they're within the correct and the true and the just. And while at the same time, there's a subtle psychological quirk that keeps people from ever doing anything, because it would collapse the truth tunnel. It would fall in on itself, and it would lead to people scattered, and nobody wants to feel stupid. Nobody wants to say, I completely bought into a truth tunnel, hook, line, and sinker, and, where do I go next? It kind of it makes your life feel pointless, does it not? That's why I've said in previous videos, you don't just believe things. You don't just hear something and believe it, because that's not intelligent. There's a space that can exist within human beings where things are theoretically true and theoretically untrue, pending further information. It's not everything requires immediate action, especially when you're talking about concepts and abstractions. And it's just interesting too, over the years, how war has changed. I mean, it's always been there, ladies and gentlemen, and it always will, until something arrives on the scene that is so powerful that nobody wants to fuck with it. It really is that way. And tech is like the cornerstone of all of this. And some of us have learned that the hard way, and other militaries have been quite happy to roll up with brand new cannons and bullets, machine guns, and the idea of nation on nation, people on people. It's like these reality tunnels. It's Germany's reality tunnel, France's reality tunnel, the United Kingdom's reality tunnel. They're all hearing bits and pieces of the truth, large enough chunks of it to keep the thing cohesive. But at the same time, there's other information in there, even the curvature of the words and the curvature of the statements and the curvature of the language, that bends reality. It makes them into these tunnels that organizes people and snaps them into a line. It goes from people wandering to a straight line, and you can walk them in a direction, because emotion has a direction, and a good politician knows that you can aim people's feet and set them walking. Because people in the upper crests, let's call it, people in leadership, spend their entire lives studying human beings, psychology and everything, so as to best understand how to lead and communicate and guide them, and to hypnotize people. Of course, like, if a leader hears that it's possible to hypnotize people, they perk right up. If they hear about some crazy shit, like it's possible to cast spells on people, which is technically true, they'll perk right up. It's like, good. How do I do that? And really, all of us are like that, to be honest. When you hear about, something like dark power, everybody perks up, because that's how we are. There's no need to lie or pretend otherwise. Like, we all are in a situation where we view ourselves in accordance to the way we influence the world and the way the world influences us, essentially. And within those two extremes, there is the vast pantheon of experience. How do you influence the world? Well, and how does the world influence you? How do you feel? And at the end, you just ask, how do you feel? How do you feel about X? And that question can elicit an extremely logical, linear, well-placed answer. Asking somebody how they feel about something is the same thing as give me a rational analysis. It's the same question because it's all associated together in one mass. And the words are like the tip of the pyramid, you know? It's the final product of attention, consciousness, memory, experience, will, all of our concepts of what's going on currently and what will be in the near future. Words are the blade cutting right through everything and shaping it at the same time. And ideas similarly organize. And that's what we're fighting for, to be honest. Like, and some of us love war, dude, you know, like it's a strange thing at the same time. Like, you know, they say war is hell, and it absolutely is. But at the same time, some people love violence. Some people love to be kicking indoors and running at full speed. And they'll have to dress it up to sound, you know, nicer and softer and more presentable and say things that make them sound not like some kind of monster. But that is a facet of humanity that's kind of inescapable. We actually like it, and we have to get doses of it. And it's smart to have a civilization that has outlets for violence. You know, give us football, basketball, boxing, MMA. You know, it's like bloodletting. You know, it's like just taking out just a little bit, so you don't have to bleed everywhere. So there doesn't have to be pent up potential. It's sort of like slowly letting go of the rubber band versus snapping it. It's that shape. It's a slow tension release where you can participate and even the way we talk about sports, you know, we say like we won, you know, talking about the team. It's easy to associate and identify with the entire organization, and we get wrapped up in it. Like it's just so immersive, you know, because the stakes are there. Like you can actually get hurt, and people do, but the stakes have to be there, you know. It's like it has to be on a razor's edge like that, and it has to be the best of the best. So, you know, there's a thing within us, as I've said, that is part animal and part saintly, you know. Those are one of the two many extremes that comprise us. And it doesn't do us any good to pretend that it's otherwise, because we can be perfectly moral, if not more moral, by being honest, you know. I personally, I don't like causing people pain, you know, but sometimes it's a necessary part of life. And I'm sure people don't like causing me pain, but sometimes it's a necessary part of life. And there are particular situations where pain is completely warranted. And, you know, there's no reason to pretend otherwise. We like to chase down the dude with the football and tackle him and bring him down, you know. We like to accurately throw the ball and thread the needle right between two people. It's you know, it's very satisfying. We like the ball going straight through the net without touching the rim, and the way that swish sounds and the way it looks, it cleans you up, you know. And the same can be said with war. There's nothing like a perfect campaign, you know, a well-executed strike. You're looking at all these parts go exactly as you planned it. Everything went exactly as anticipated, and you're in and you're out. That's the perfect war, really. And that is the sign, I think, that you are headed in the right direction, and you can argue that. And I would say that you probably have valid points if you argued against that. But at the same time, if war is a necessary evil, then the best wars are the ones that are the most accurate and are the shortest and make their point and leave, you know. That's really the best possible war, is it not? Hypothetically, the perfect war would be where enemy combatants are defeated, zero civilians are even affected at all, and leadership capitulates in some way, and that's it. And if you can get as close to that as humanly possible, of course, with no losses on your side, actually, it's considered a negative to have to spend money on munitions, to even have to expend any kind of resource on it. An even more perfect war would be as if you could achieve that without spending $1. Now that's the next level, but we're not there yet, you know. But it is getting cheaper, and it is getting far more accurate, and you could even say that war is getting to a place where it's becoming better. I mean, the United States is capable of things right now that simply have never been possible. We could go back and forth, like I said, about semantics and about who's in charge and all of those things, but if you just look at the operations on their face, it's pretty astounding, you know. And every once in a while, you know, the United States is the world premier superpower, and that's just the truth. And we have surrounded the globe. We have the high ground all over the place. There's not much that actually happens without the United States seeing it. And our allies are some of the most, I guess you could say, forward-thinking places on Earth. And we're in a situation where every 40 years or so, if you think about it like this, you know, if you're responsible for what you might call world policing, or you're the sort of global authority, after you have a little period of time where you exercise hard power and it's quite successful, from the next day on, the world is already unraveling. It's already subject to the forces of entropy, and the forces of opposition are already meeting and talking and discussing. And it doesn't start to reveal itself immediately. It takes years and years and years. You know, a decade later, 15, 20 years later, you'll start to see blocks of opposition form, you know, different alliances, and the world slowly becomes less stable over time. And every once in a while, the world's superpower, or whoever is the source of authority, has to reinstate its authority. If it doesn't do that, then it will continue to build momentum favoring its opposition. Even if its opposition is mostly bluster, it still forms a political opposition that can organize over time and build and build and build, which isn't good either, you know, which is kind of what's been going on because, like I said, places like Iran don't really want to fight. They want to talk about fighting and make it seem as if they're just rearing to go, you know, as much as possible without actually going there. So, you know, the fact that they actually had to go there just completely shatters the illusion. The reality tunnel collapses. And, you know, it's mostly possible because of the vast technological ability to just spread information these days, you know, whether true or untrue. People are creating these little reality tunnels all the time, you know, and I honestly think we're getting better and better at, you know, discovering what is and isn't true. Because before these things pop off, there's years of propaganda, you know, there's years of enemy shaping and alliance shaping and slowly bringing the temperature up, slowly preparing the population, for some kind of potential somewhere or war somewhere. And you can just kind of see the direction over time. And the temperature slowly rises and rises and rises until one day it's just under boiling. Everybody's heard the frog analogy. And you're going to need reasoning. Like, we need to be walked through the reasoning, no matter what it is. And if we can be taken from beginning to end with full continuity, with the ideas and logic and reasoning and emotion even, we will say, okay, that's fine. And no matter how sound your reasoning, there's always going to be people who appear to challenge it. Because of course, any line of reasoning, no matter how absolutely perfect, is going to have challengers. And you deal with that as it comes. Even for the most true of events. Every event that happens these days, due to the nature of the way these reality tunnels have kind of shown up and disappeared and shown to be pretty brittle, people don't really believe that much anymore. Like, every time something happens, there's immediately somebody who is, I don't want to use the word conspiratorial, but it's there, dude. It's always there now, because more and more people are viewing the world as a kind of stage, and I don't blame people, because that's kind of how it is, because that's how it looks when you build entire alternate versions of reality for an entire group of people over years. What else are you supposed to think? We say these things and we come to these conclusions, and sometimes we have completely fabricated lines of reasoning. And what do you do in that situation? That just sets you so far back. It's like, even if the reasoning is hard to hear, and it doesn't really matter what it is, like, you have to say it. You have to connect the dots. Otherwise, people are going to connect other dots, because people like to be right too, It's gratifying to work your way through something and get to a conclusion and be correct about it, because it not only is correct, but it says something about your ability to deduce. And into the future, for us, it's like, I think it's safe to say the F-22 and the F-35 are very, very good stealth platforms. Like, they're quite capable. I mean, we're talking S-300s and S-400s for the Iranian air defense, and, to not lose a single aircraft, even with Venezuela too, to not lose a single aircraft is insane in terms of, like, the history of war and air defense. And those aircraft are soon going to become the past. Soon we're going to have another generation that are combined with what they call loyal wingmen, which are essentially artificial intelligence aircraft surrounding piloted aircrafts, almost like a mothership. And the U.S. is pretty well poised to become more and more powerful. And honestly, I'm all about it. Somebody has to do it. So somebody has to go head and shoulders above the rest, and it may as well be where I am. I wouldn't want it to be anywhere else. I would prefer that I am at least some way responsible, And because I know my own intentions. That's not to say that I'm in any kind of position of power. I'm obviously not, but still, being within the place's borders that have the most sway and direction over the world as at least something more than nothing, and for what it counts for, I am mostly interested in this territory because we're all linked here. I mean, we're all linked globally, but we're especially linked in the United States. And I want this entire country and every person in it to become as wealthy as humanly possible, to have as much agency as humanly possible, but to also be as civilized and as moral as humanly possible. It's like my standards are perfect, but I know that's not possible, but that's still the standard. It's like I want everybody to be able to eat, not have to commit crime, but at the same time not want to. The United States is overfed, if anything, so you can't argue that people are starving, for a loaf of bread committing crime. That's just not a viable. That's an old philosophical quandary that applied at some time, but it certainly doesn't apply now. People don't commit crime out of necessity anymore. That's an antiquated notion, and it should be deleted from the discussion, at least in terms of the United States, or at least the Western world. That's not why people commit crime. The question of the United States today is a genuinely moral, emotional question. It's an intellectual question. It's a question of the animal and the sentient part of us at the same time, the synergy of those things. And our reasons for fighting wars and our reasons for doing the things we do run in parallel with that. And it'll be interesting because this is truly a global thing now. It truly is directional for the planet, and we'll see who ends up with who. But I have my hunches. But I think technology as well is about to change the game even more than we even know right now. Because it's like I said in the past, a lot of the time we do things because we feel a certain way, and then we look in retrospect to find the true reason why we did something. It's not always easy to know it in the moment. It's not easy to see the full picture. Maybe most of it. Maybe the motives are pure, but we were misinformed. But I find it hard to believe that the United States intelligence services and the people at large who are looking into international geopolitics are uninformed. I think it's the exact opposite. I think there is no more informed institution on Earth about the state of the world than the United States intelligence services and some allies as well. I think we have quite a complete picture more than ever, because as anybody knows, when it comes to war and politics, information is everything. It's everything. And we see everything. I mean, if you think about how massive of an advantage that is, to have the reach that we do, the psychic reach, to have some version of our senses touching just about everywhere on Earth. And we have only just begun.